Softeon's Logistics Thought Leaders video series.
Hi, this is Dan Gilmore from Softeon, here with another episode in our ongoing Logistics Thought Leadership discussions, today with Jim Barnes, founder and CEO of leading consulting firm enVista. Today we have a great topic. What is the science, and I think maybe a little bit of art, in correctly sizing a new distribution center? We'll be back with Jim's insight on this topic in just a few seconds.
This broadcast is brought to you by Softeon, an innovative provider of software solutions for warehouse management, distributed order management, labor management, and more. Softeon, delivering supply chain success every time.
Okay, Jim, this has always been a very interesting topic to me because I don't think there's any real consensus in the industry on how to do this the right way. Why don't we start here, though? There's a lot of factors that obviously go into facility sizing. What are some of the most important?
Well, like you said, Dan, there are a number of factors, but I think there's a couple key factors that you got to start before you start sizing the facility, right? So let's talk about the genesis of what a warehouse and distribution center does. It's basically there to store buffer inventory based upon supply and demand variability. And so when I say that, why that is important to lead with is that a distribution center or a warehouse has different functions depending upon that demand versus supply variability, and obviously the lead time or tolerance time to the customer. So retail is much different than if I was a wholesale distributor. But in terms of answering specifically your questions, I think there are really three key data points, and then we can drill into some more specifics as the conversation progresses. First and foremost is going to be around item SKU and inventory. So how much inventory in terms of inventory snapshot by month, looking at both peak period, averages, and standard deviation. SKU count. You're going to be looking at overall receipt profiles of how you're moving inventory in the actual facility, and then obviously your outbound profiles in terms of your order and shipment data. So again, three major data sets: receipt profiles, item inventory profiles, and then obviously your order outbound shipment profiles. And as we talk about item inventory, specifically around how much cube those items take up. And when I say item cube is at every single both receipt unit of measure and sellable unit of measure. And a good example of that, Dan, is simply looking at, let's look at a unique SKU. So is it being sold at the each level? Is it being sold at the interpack level? Is it being sold at the case pack level, pallet quantity level? And again, those unit of measures that I talk about both on the receipt profile and the outbound profile are important because the fact that they take up different dimensional cube in terms of how I actually store the product, in both a reserve storage location and also how I store it in a forward pick location.
Okay, very good. That's a great way to kick this off. Jim, I've been involved in some of these projects in the past myself here, and in the end, though, it seems to me it comes down to a forecast. Somebody's got to step up and say, this is what we think we're going to do over the next 5-7 years, whatever it happens to be. And of course, forecasts are subject to error. To deal with that variability in the forecasting, you like to use the concept I've heard you talk about called confidence intervals. How is that concept used in this scenario?
Yeah, so ultimately you're not going to design a building for the first year. I mean, you're going to be typically designing a building for a 5-year to 10-year type growth strategy. And as you move, as we all know, as you move more and more into the future, the forecast accuracy or the error rate increases. So what you do is you ultimately build in confidence intervals as it relates to each future year, and then from there, really build around design assumptions. So, my design assumption and my confidence interval for what I'm doing today, obviously is very high because it's real. I'm doing it today. But as I move into future years, that confidence interval is starting to decrease. So then you can start building in different buffers or different variability to manage with that as that confidence interval starts to degrade over time. But the biggest issue, quite frankly, with most retailers and distributors is, what does that forecast look like? What is my SKU proliferation going to look like? What's my cell proliferation going to look like in terms of growth? What's my receipt profile is going to look like? And more importantly, which has a huge impact on a facility design and the capacity how it's built, is inventory turns. Am I going to continue to stay at, let's say, 4 turns a year, which is, let's say, I'm turning my inventory every 90 days, or I'm going to try to improve that to, basically 6 turns a year. So turns has a significant impact on the building as well as you start to move physical cube throughout the actual facility.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And that whole forecasting thing, I was involved in a project in the late 90s where a company was experiencing tremendous growth, and frankly, the sales was reluctant to step up to a strong forecast, and they wound up undersizing that building, had to build a second one within the next 3 or 4 years. So just amazing. Jim, in the end, the sizing's never going to be perfect, no matter what you do, for all the factors we just talked about, especially the forecasting, which is so difficult as you go out in years. But so it seems to me the key thing is designing in flexibility. What are some of the keys to doing that?
Well, there's a number of things, right? I mean, if you're going to break down a warehouse or distribution center into a couple key functions, there's going to be a need to receive product. So if you're receiving full containers, you're going to be 8 feet off the dock plus 40 feet. So you're going to need some level of receiving space. The same thing's going to go for shipping, especially if you are moving LTL or full truckload compared to parcel, where I may do a direct load or a fluid load, again, depending upon the distribution network being either retail centric or distribution centric. And then you're going to have storage mediums, and then you're going to have some level of forward pick locations, and you may have some level of automation. That automation may be a unit sorter, a cross belt sorter, a tilt tray sorter. It could be a simple put to light. If it's flow through, we could use pick walls today, which are very, very hot in the marketplace. So you break that down, you're going to start to build adjacencies around different inventory flow paths and also labor flow paths. So you look at how to build the variability in. I tell people all the time is that once you take away the space, you never get the space back. So where I like to actually put an extra buffer is obviously in reserve storage. I want to make sure I put additional buffer in my receiving docks because you don't want congested docks. I think people, quite frankly, minimize the importance of receiving. It's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. And then obviously on the shipping side, you want to make sure that you've got ample shipping staging locations as it relates to the operation of the facility. So, my advice to organizations is don't shortchange yourself on space. And then obviously there's things you can do in terms of moving on reserve storage from very narrow aisle to simple narrow aisle to wide aisle. And again, a lot of this, Dan, is predicated on the type of product in the inventory flow as it relates to those demand signals. So again, I use a good example of if I'm a retail-centric organization and I'm moving through a flow through because I'm pre-allocating inventory, that distribution center is going to look much different than if I'm doing post-allocation, meaning that I'm receiving product, putting it away, and then waiting for store distros after I receive product. So, my adage is, and you can quote me on this, and I love this quote, not because it's my quote, but it just really tells a story, is it tell me how you allocate, and I will tell you what your distribution center looks like. And what I mean by that is if I'm running in a pre-allocation mindset with my merchants and buyers, and I'm pre-allocating based upon an advanced ship notice, that facility is going to look quite different than if I'm doing post-allocation because I've either got systemic constraints or the merchants and buyers of that retail environment don't feel comfortable making an allocation decision in terms of where that inventory is going, either by channel or by store in advance. So, it's really important to understand how merchants, buyers, and allocators work, and more importantly, how to change the mindset to flow inventory through one's distribution center network.
All right. Well, there's obviously a man who knows what he's talking about, Jim. That was some fantastic insight. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely, Dan. Appreciate it. Anytime.